Hello! Welcome back to my channel. My name is Rachel. If you have never seen my face before, it's lovely to meet you. I am so excited that you have happened upon this video, and if you like what you see, then please feel free to subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving you my top tips and recommendations for how to achieve a first class result in your dissertation or thesis. This video might be slightly more targeted towards people who have studied an engineering or science degree where you have to do a project in combination with your dissertation or thesis, but I still think the writing tips will be beneficial no matter what your degree. If you have any friends that are trying to kind of navigate this situation right now, please feel free to forward this video on. Hopefully they'll find it beneficial and learn something that they didn't know before. Please appreciate the fact that I have dressed in this little official white shirt for this video. I am trying to look professional and intellectual, and I hope that I'm feeling you. Okay, so I thought I'd give a little background to myself and why I feel at all entitled to give this type of advice. So I studied biomedical engineering at uni, and I had to produce two kind of large pieces of work during uni. So in my fourth year I produced a 10,000 word dissertation that was worth 40 credits out of 120, so it was worth a third of my overall grade, and that was made up of 70% dissertation and 30% research poster. So I scored 76% in that altogether. I'm not sure about the breakdown for that, but that was my overall grade. And then in fifth year I did a group project and we had to create a thesis for that. It was again a third of the overall grade and we scored 80% altogether, so we were really pleased with that. So first of all, I'm going to go over a few wee things that I think are really useful to know before you start. If you're watching this and you've already started, don't worry, these things can be kind of brought in whenever, but I think it is just really good to kind of start as you want to go on. So one of my first things would be to organise your workspace. So no matter what kind of way you're working, I think it's really important to try and just organise your space. So I did this through making separate folders for each kind of element that I know that I would have to work on during the project. So perhaps data collection or report writing, like time management, planning, that sort of thing. So everything had separate folders, and even within them I had smaller folders again. So within the report writing section there was a introduction, methodology, results, that kind of thing, and that just helps you separate everything out into smaller chunks and kind of stay on track with what you need to get done. Okay, so another piece of advice I would give is to make versions. So irrelevant of what type of document you're working on, I would just make versions of everything. Basically, everyone knows the feeling of losing work, and throughout uni I lost a lot of work by not saving things as I go. Now it's kind of second nature to me because I've lost so much work in the past. Yeah, definitely make versions. Make it for like Word documents, and also if you're working on a specific software, so maybe like a CAD software or any type of software, make versions of kind of important points that you get to, because things can go wrong that are out with your control, especially if you're using a university computer. It can just crash and that's nothing that you've done, but you don't want to lose all that valuable work that you've worked so hard on. So definitely make versions of things just to save yourself having to do it again and again. Okay, so this next one is one of the most kind of important factors that you can do prior to starting. Make a plan. So in proper engineering style, I made a Gantt chart. It is literally the most basic thing. I made it on Excel, but it just kind of says like how much time you've got, what kind of tasks that you need to get done. I would also set milestones and deliverables within your plan. So a milestone is something that you need to kind of complete in order to stay on track with your project. So an example could be receiving ethics approval or finishing data collection or something along those lines. And deliverables are something that you know that must be achieved by a certain point. So you may be given dates by your supervisor where they want to have the chapters by a certain date, so you know that is a deliverable that you have to achieve. Another example is perhaps a submission date for presentations, posters, that kind of thing. The final date of submission, that's like your main deliverable. So include things like that just so you know how you can stay on track. I made a Gantt chart for my overall project, but you can split it into just the writing sections, and it just breaks everything into small chunks so that you know where you are, what you have to do, and by when, and I think it's really useful to start off that way. Also at the start I would try and organise regular meetings with your supervisor. I find it really useful to track the meetings, and I used a kind of PowerPoint. So I would header each slide with like the date of the meeting and then include what we've discussed, what we need to do, and by when. That was really useful to look back on. Okay, so the next section is about picking a research area, title and supervisor. So for both years I had to pick from a list of predetermined titles with the associated supervisors and then work from there. When thinking about what to pick, I would say bear in mind that you're going to be studying this for possibly up to a year. So pick something that you're interested in and that you're comfortable studying for that length of time. Also be mindful of picking something that will be beneficial to you in the long run. So for example, in my fifth year we ended up doing a project that involved using software that you would never use before, and that ended up actually looking really good on CVs and when applying for jobs. So kind of be mindful of that and think what is going to benefit you in the long run. If possible, I would say work with a supervisor that you know and that you are comfortable with. You're going to be working on this project for a while and you don't want to be dreading asking your supervisor for help. So I would say if possible, try and pick one that you know is supportive and that you're comfortable with. Okay, so these are some tips for starting out the writing side of things. So when you start, you should get a booklet from your uni with guidance on things to do with the writing. So for example, word count, text, font, binding options like margins, all that kind of stuff. I'll include a screenshot of what mine looked like and hopefully you'll get something similar. I just kept referring to that all through writing just to make sure that I was staying on track. Your structure will also be different depending on your area of study. So I would recommend finding what structure is appropriate for you. You can do this by speaking to your supervisor, having a look at previous examples from your kind of degree, and also having a look at dissertations online. When it comes to writing, I would just say just start. Realistically, it's probably going to be shit when you start, but you will get better. I know it can be daunting when you have this massive word count and you're thinking, how am I going to even start this? But the thing is, you just need to start. As soon as you start putting your thoughts on paper, everything will come together eventually. When you're writing as well, I think it's a really good idea to get continuous feedback and organise that with your supervisor. Don't leave everything until it's like completely polished and final to then start getting feedback, because realistically that'll be quite close to the end and you won't have lots of time to make changes. So continuous feedback is really important. Another thing is just to do what works for you. Everyone has their own styles, and just because your other classmates can maybe get up at the crack of dawn and blast out chapter after chapter doesn't mean they're better than you if you get a burst of energy at like 1 in the morning and do the same thing. Like, everyone has their own pace of working, so just do what works for you. Okay, so now all that kind of introductory stuff is covered, I'm going to get into the body of the dissertation. So the first part is your introduction. For me, this was my very first chapter and it was split into subsections of background, review of the literature, and your aim/hypothesis. This might be a different structure to what you've been given. I know that some people do a literature review as a chapter of its own, so just consult with your supervisor and see what the guidance is for you. So for the introduction, I tackled these 3 subsections completely separate. So I made separate Word documents for each of them, and it just kind of broke up the tasks a wee bit and it made it a little bit less intimidating. It's also worth noting that this chapter kind of evolves as the project continues, so it's not something that you start at the beginning of your project and then you're finished. It does continue to evolve the more that you do and the more that you learn, so don't worry about it not being the finished article at the very beginning of your project, if you know what I mean. For your background section, this is basically you introducing your research topic in a general sense and giving a kind of broad background of the area and its relevance. So the background should point out problem areas within the overall subject area and narrow down to the particular area that you're going to be investigating. But at this point you don't want to give too much detail because that's going to be in your literature review. So you're just kind of briefly introducing the problem area in this section. Your background should also give a brief overview of your aims, but again keep this brief because you're going to elaborate on these further in your aims subsection. Within your background you should give a brief overview of the structure of your dissertation, including your core chapters and what you're going to discuss throughout the piece of work. Okay, so now to discuss literature review. This is generally the most kind of daunting part of the project, I think. So your literature review should normally be one of the first things that you commence, and that is so that you can have a look at the research, see what other people have done and see what you can contribute to it, or if you can do something kind of totally different. When discussing the structure of a literature review, people commonly reference the inverted pyramid analogy, so I'll include this right here. So that is basically when you look at your topic in a broad sense and then you're able to get more and more specific until you get to a point where you can introduce a gap in the research and how your proposed research fills that gap. So when it comes to searching for literature, I would say have a kind of general idea of what kind of areas you're going to want to go into so that you can look for specific literature in those areas. Don't be afraid to start, even if you don't really know what you're looking for straight away. The more that you read, the more you will discover and the more kind of interesting areas you can delve into. For starting out, I think it's useful to speak to your supervisor and see if they can point you in the direction of useful papers. It is hopefully going to be their specialism, so they should have relevant papers. So my supervisor gave me a couple and then I kind of went from there and started searching appropriate terms from there. So when searching, I have to be honest, I use Google. I just use Google. I tried to use these large database searches and searching keywords and stuff, but I just found the number of results really overwhelming and I just did not know where to start. So I use Google, and I'm not telling you to use Google, you probably shouldn't. However, I think Google Scholar is useful. I've seen other people discuss that, so Google Scholar will kind of whistle out the rubbish in the search and it will only give you articles. Also, if you're not sure how to access papers, there should be sections on websites where you can log in via your institution and then you'll be able to download them for free most of the time. So in terms of looking for papers, I think that review papers are a great way to start. It just makes your life so much easier because someone else has already done that work for you basically, so you can just have a look at what they've done and then take it from there. So when looking at papers, you can generally tell if a paper is relevant from the abstract and conclusion. So I would generally look at these and then kind of skim read the rest and decide if it was definitely relevant. The discussion is also a really good place for finding other papers, because similarly to review papers, the author has already done the work for you and compared the different papers. So I think it's a really good place to look if you're struggling to find other papers. For making notes, I would generally open a Word document and write the title of the paper, including the author's name, and then copy and paste the link just in case something happens to the PDF that you saved. I would then copy and paste the bits that I thought were relevant and just write kind of summary notes, so like what their main aims were, what methodology they followed, their main results, kind of key trends and stuff like that, and just summarise that. My process was quite iterative, so I would then go back at a later date and paraphrase the main sections that I wanted to include in my literature review, and I would paraphrase these into a separate document. I know that copy and pasting might not be the best recommendation to give, but I generally find that always worked for me, and I would always have one document open which I knew was the copy and pasted sections, and then I'd make a completely separate document for parts that I'd paraphrase. It's really important to not get those mixed up, because the last thing that you want is to get caught plagiarising anything, and I'm not encouraging you to plagiarise. I just think it was beneficial for me to know exactly what they said, so that then I could put it into my own words, and I could always just refer back to that document instead of always searching for the papers in my folders. So in your literature review, you're wanting to outline the breadth of work that has already been carried out and the information that has come from that work. For a good literature review, you need to be able to constructively analyse the work that's been carried out. So this can be through discussing conflicts between papers, or kind of conversely discussing like trends that you've seen, which should then highlight why further work is necessary. Different sections can have different kind of structures. For example, in mine, some sections were kind of chronologically ordered, so showing how the research has kind of progressed through the years and what the kind of current state is. But again, I would kind of refer to similar papers and just see what the best structure is for you. In your literature review, it's really good to utilise tables and figures. You can get so much information in tables and figures without taking up like a big chunk of your word count. I also think it's really beneficial if you can to make your own figures. So it's all kind of well and good copying a figure directly from someone else's paper and referencing them, but I think it's a bit more impactful to kind of try and like recreate your own. So I would use PowerPoint to make my own figures, and I do think that's a bit better than just copy and pasting them. If you kind of can't recreate or create your own figure and you do end up using one from another article, it is really important that you reference them appropriately. So the final section of your introduction is your aims/hypothesis section. This shouldn't be a super long section, perhaps a couple paragraphs, and it should just set out what your research questions are and what your aims and objectives are. This section should correlate with topics that you have previously discussed in your literature review and the gap of knowledge that you previously introduced. You shouldn't be kind of introducing new topics in this section, as it should have already been covered in the literature review. If you have a research hypothesis, you should also include it in this section. So the next section that I'm going to discuss is the methodology. So this was my second chapter. So if you're watching this and you have not started writing yet and you're kind of in the midst of carrying out your project, my advice would be to write every single thing down. Take pictures of everything, write everything down, and then your method will actually come together quite quickly because you have a good recollection of everything that you did. If you have to carry out some kind of experimental or computational work, a protocol will kind of arise like as you continue, but it's important to write everything down so that you can refer back to the exact steps that you did. It's really important to note down like specifics of things that you use, so for example models, manufacturers, materials, softwares, stuff like that. If you are organised during your data collection, it really does make things so much easier for you like as you continue. So you're going to start your methodology by introducing the type of data that you're looking at in order to address your research aims and the type of methodology that you can use to collect this data. You are then going to go on to describe your data collection. So this section obviously depends on the type of work that you've carried out. So for example, experimental work, surveys, interviews, that kind of thing. For more experimental work, you're going to want the person reading it to be able to recreate the experiment that you did from the information that you're given in the paper. So as I said, you're going to want to be as specific as you can be with things like manufacturers, models, that sort of thing, and also number of repetitions and any controls that you included. When discussing data collection, making your own diagrams is a really useful tool. I would use PowerPoint to make experimental setups, and I think it's really effective. It kind of shows that you've really thought about it and that you've put in that bit of extra effort. It also reduces the number of words that you need to use because you can also just direct your reader towards the diagram and you don't have to speak through every single component of it. You also are going to have to consider what's the best structure for your methodology. For my undergraduate, it worked for me to do it chronologically, and that might work for you as well, but in my postgraduate one it worked best to split it into two separate methodologies, one for experimental and one for computational. So even though I was actually doing these simultaneously, I separated them into two separate sections. So next you're going to want to describe your analysis methodology. Again, with this section you want to give repeatable information. So if you use statistical analysis, you're going to want to include specifics about what you use. So for example, how you prepared your data, tests that you use, software, sample size, confidence levels, all those type of things. Alternatively, you may have a section on processing or post-processing, visualization, that kind of thing. And again, you're going to want to give specifics about what you did. It is important not to give any information on the findings in your methodology. You're simply explaining how you acquired the data and how you process the data. In your methods, you should include a section on the justification of your methods. So you can include this as a separate subsection, or you can mix it in with your descriptions of collection and analysis. For example, why you used a particular statistical test, any theory underpinning your methodology, and potentially including equations in that. You can also explain why you didn't use other methods and why they weren't suitable for your particular study. Any limitations or weaknesses in the methods that you use should also be brought to the reader's attention, as well as any ways that you use to overcome these weaknesses. So the next section is your results section. This was my third chapter. Similarly to your methods, if you're watching this and you're still in the process of data collection, write all your results down, take pictures of everything, and then your results can be a pretty quick section if you're organised. So for your results section, you're going to want to spend a wee bit of time thinking about the best way to present your data. It may be beneficial to have a conversation with your supervisor and discuss what they think the best kind of visualization methods are for this type of data. So you can use things like graphs, tables, charts, images. There's so many options, and that's something that you just need to think about. So in your results section, you're simply wanting to describe your results. So this can be describing trends that you see and stating particular values if that is important to your study. In the results section, you're simply reporting your findings. You're not trying to discuss them, explain them, or draw any conclusions from them. You just simply report them. With that reasoning, in this section, you should not be trying to introduce any additional literature. Okay, so the next section is your discussion section. So the discussion section is a really important section which I have previously not left myself enough time for, so please learn from my mistakes and leave yourself plenty of time for your discussion. In this section, you go into more detail and discuss your results as opposed to just reporting them, and you relate it to other published work, including those findings that you discussed in your literature review. You should reflect upon the main findings of the study and how they have helped to enhance the current knowledge of the field and fill the research gap that you previously discussed. It's important that you don't introduce new results in this section and that you are simply elaborating on the ones that you introduced in the results section. If you had a hypothesis, in this section you would determine whether or not you can reject the null hypothesis and why. In this section you would also acknowledge and discuss the limitations of your study and try and look at your research study from a kind of objective point of view. In this section you can also potentially discuss sources of error and artifacts that arose in your study. I know there's a bit of discussion about whether this should go in the discussion or in your methods, so I'd just confirm that with your supervisor, but make sure that that is something you mention. You should also discuss the future work that can be carried out from this project. So next is your conclusion. This section should state your conclusions, obviously, with respect to the original research question that you discussed in your aims. In this section you should summarise and reflect on the main findings that you discussed and also reiterate the future work recommendations that you previously mentioned. You should also reinforce what your research has contributed to the research area as a whole. The conclusion should be pretty concise. It may feel repetitive with respect to what you've just written in the discussion, but it is important to kind of reiterate all these points in the conclusion and summarise everything. So now I'm going to discuss the abstract section. You should write your abstract after you've written the kind of main body of the text. The abstract should summarise the key findings of the paper, and a reader should be able to read the abstract and understand the piece of work without having to read the entire paper. So the abstract must cover your research questions and aims, a brief description of your methodology, should summarise your most significant findings and their implications with respect to the overall topic, and it should state your conclusions. My word limit for my abstract was 300 words, but just verify with your own university what your requirements are, and your abstract should be in a standalone page within your dissertation. So that has been finished, the kind of main body of text. So if you've made it this far, then you're almost there. Next we're going to discuss references. Now I think that when you say references it sends shivers down everyone's spine, but if you're organised during the process then references shouldn't be too terrible. They're still a lot more time consuming than you first expect, so try and leave a decent amount of time for it, but you should be okay if you're organised throughout. The first step is to make sure that you know your referencing style. So mine was always Harvard, that was set by my university, but just double check as yours might be different or you might not be given one. So have a look at kind of similar papers and what they've used. So once you know your referencing style, you should then have a look at how to correctly cite and reference throughout for different types of materials. So for example, chapters in books, articles, journals, that sort of thing. Also check if there is a limit on the number of references that you can use. As I said, try reference as you go because it will save you a lot of time at the end. I generally got references from article websites. There's normally a section that says like citation. It has a few different styles there. I also would use other papers, so I'd check their references section at the end. and copy and paste it and then just kind of convert it to the style that I needed. And I also use Cite This For Me, which is a website, so if you cannot find an appropriate reference anywhere, then you can use that website. I actually did references manually, but I think there's a lot more efficient ways to do that. I think it's a lot more time consuming and prone to error. I think there are softwares that you can use which reference for you. I can't speak for them because I didn't use them, but I've heard of EndNote, and apparently Google Scholar has an extension that you can use and it can reference for you, so I'd have a look into that. So the next 3 sections are ones that can kind of be done whenever during the project. They're quite low energy tasks, so maybe it saves these for a day where you just can't be bothered. You don't have a lot of energy. You'll get these tasks done and then you'll feel accomplished, and I think that's good for when you encounter a kind of lull in the process. So you have your title page. So this is the first page of your document. Again, check the guidance from your university. So mine included my name, my registration number, department, institution, university, and also date of submission. It's normally good practice to also include your kind of logo for your university or department, or if you're doing it in combination with a potentially like an industry partner, include their logo as well. Then you have your declaration. So this comes after your title page. This is basically a declaration that the work that you've produced is your own and that you've not just put your name on it and it's not someone else's work. Again, check the guidance of your university for what you have to include. Mine included a word count with the number of tables and figures, and also my signature with the date of completion. After your declaration comes your abstract, which we've already discussed, and then you have your acknowledgement page. This is basically a page just to say thank you to everyone that's helped you kind of along the way. So like your supervisors, any kind of potentially postdoc students that helped you, family, your partner. It's not compulsory, although it is kind of academic best practice, so I would just include one. It really doesn't take a lot of time. I just use the thesaurus function to find different ways to say grateful for, thankful for. Yeah, it's not a big deal to include it. So after your acknowledgements, you then have your table of contents. I'm going to include a wee screen recording on how to do this in Word. So you basically go to the references section in Word and then apply chapters or headings to your different like section titles. Be sure to include kind of different font sizes and potentially like maybe font, italic, underline, just to kind of discriminate between the different types of subsections. Make your table of contents start with page 1 being the main body of text, so page 1 of your first chapter, so your introduction. You then have list of figures and list of tables, and this comes after your table of contents. So again, in Word, you go to the references section and then you go to insert caption, and then from there you can select insert table of figures, and then you can repeat this for your tables. Make sure the font style and size is consistent throughout. So I generally use a smaller size font for the captions and made it like an italic style. Make sure each figure and table has a clear caption so the reader knows exactly what they're looking at. Ensure the captions are fully descriptive. Your reader should be able to look at that as like a standalone figure and know what you're talking about. Remember to include any units, axis labels and legends on graphs that you have included, and make sure you lay out your tables clearly with appropriate headings and units if necessary. I'm sure you know this by now, but captions go above tables and below figures. If you're using equations a lot throughout the piece of work, then I would just verify with your university on how to kind of lay these out. So I numbered mine, but I didn't include like a list of equations. If you've used a lot, then that might be necessary, but just confirm that with your supervisor. Also, if you use a large number of acronyms throughout, I would discuss with your supervisor on how best to lay that out. So potentially you may want to include a list of abbreviations, and it is best practice to, the first time that you introduce an acronym, you should include it in the full form and then put parentheses with the acronym after it. So that is the end of this video. If you made it to the end, thank you very much. I hope you took something useful away from this, and please, if you have any further questions, leave them in a comment down below and I will definitely get back to you. Like I said before, if you have friends that are also trying to do a dissertation or thesis this year, please share this with them and maybe they will learn something new as well. Please like this video if you did like it and if it brought any value to you, and subscribe if you would like to see any more of me. It would really mean a lot to me. Also, thank you for the support that I've received so far. This is the first one that I'm filming since posting my first video, and I am at 93 subscribers and I am buzzing. Please feel free to check out any of my other videos and I will see you in the next one. Bye! Mum, no Empire biscuit?
Oh.
It's okay.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Bye! My whole setup's been ruined. Yes?
I'm just like that. I need my boots.
God.
Can you reach?
You're gonna wet yourself?
Just as one's nearest you.
Oh, I won't nearest me.
Let's see. Empty my bloody hole.
It's fine. I've got everything in the right order. I know exactly when it's going back. Is it on? I'm trying to turn this bloody camera off. I can't. Am I near the...
You're right. You know.